On this day, 2021, the decades later sequel to the 1992 original Candyman opens in theaters.
Candyman, you don't have to believe. Just beware.
There's a return, you know.
In a motion picture that ends what the first one barely started. Candyman, farewell to the flesh. Candyman, Day of the Dead.
Help me! Help me!
From Artisan Entertainment.
My victim.
This is not real. It's not real. Candyman.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank you all for spending some of your Tuesday morning here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today marks 3 years since the release of Nia DaCosta's Jordan Peele-produced, alleged spiritual sequel to the 1992 masterpiece, in my opinion, horror classic, Candyman. Now, whether Jordan Peele really intended for it to be a sleight of hand or deliberate misdirection, which is what I think it was, Candyman 2021 was originally earmarked similar to Top Gun Maverick. I feel like those two films had similar release dates, but both movies were wrapped way in advance of summer of 2020. Top Gun Maverick supposedly was finished by November or December of 2019. The idea all along, though, was Memorial Day release. And what became Candyman 2021 was always supposed to be Candyman 2020. The film was completed sometime late 2019, early 2020. Then COVID happened, and they pushed Candyman back a full year so that it could get a theatrical release, similar to what Tom Cruise was able to usher through with Top Gun Maverick. He did not, under any circumstances, wanted the movie to hit streaming first. He ended up being really right about that. So Candyman 2021, it landed, I think it had been previewed, but the buzz was good. And I went to see it on its first day. If the movie had been trashed by critics, I don't think that I would have gone to see it the first day, even though it was playing at the Shore 8 in Huntington, literally a block and a half from my apartment. But if it had been savaged by critics as Candyman, Farewell to the Flesh, in 1995, I think I would have done a no thank you and not gone to the movies. But the buzz was good, and the early reviews I saw were very good. The Rotten Tomatoes score was in the low 80s right away. So in my mind, I said, this is going to be a quality film. And I didn't go into major depth with the reviews. But here's what I knew. I had loved Jordan Peele's Get Out. Didn't think Us was that good. I thought that Us had a lot of incredible ideas, but I found the film to be disastrous. I thought it was really bad. But you have to have enormous talent to make a movie with as much style and conceptually as strong as Us and still have me say it's a bad movie. Nothing to do with the filmmaking. I just thought that there were better ideas. There was a better movie to be made from what the central concept of the film is. I had the same thought with M. Night Shyamalan's Old. There's stretches of brilliant movie making in Us and in Shyamalan's Old. But I think that both movies had the components to be a lot better. Just my opinion. A lot of people disagree, and then there are some people that would go even further and say, Old is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. Us is horrendous. And then on the other side, Us is the best movie that Jordan Peele's ever made, etc., etc. So what I knew was that Tony Todd, who so beautifully, menacingly, frighteningly plays Candyman in the first 3 Candyman movies. The less said about Candyman 3, Day of the Dead, the better. But he has his best role is the first one, not surprisingly. The second one, he does a lot of hacking and slashing, but the second one is just a disposable, recycled horror film. There's nothing new. There's not even an attempt to do something in part two. It's just a cash grab, and that really upset me at the time. But when I was reading in advance of Candyman 2021 that Tony Todd was in the film, they didn't specify, is he playing the Candyman again? They assume that he was, but is he going to have a big role? Is it a walk-on? Is it a cameo? I didn't know any of the particulars of that. But the reviews were good enough where I said, okay, let's go to see it. To my surprise, even with the reviews being solid, the film exceeded expectations. And the lead actor, Yahya Abdel-Mateen, I think he's fucking brilliant. His next movie, or the movie that he shot next, is Matrix Resurrections, where he plays a different iteration of the Morpheus that we all know and love. And people were upset at the time because, hey, Morpheus is Lawrence Fishburne. What are we doing here? But the story they told in Matrix Resurrections, it made a lot of sense that they did not bring back Lawrence Fishburne as Morpheus. Regardless of what the mechanics were, did he want too much money? Did the Wachowskis just not want to deal with it? Did they say, no, we don't need him? I don't know. But Yahya Abdel-Mateen was really good in Matrix Resurrection. He is terrific in Candyman 2021. Now, I am going to have to spoil certain elements, but these are the kinds of spoilers I know you can tolerate because I'm not giving away any plot points. The misdirection, the sleight of hand that I referred to at the outset of this episode with the new Candyman, is that Jordan Peele was not being truthful when he said it's a spiritual sequel, it's a soft reboot. No, it is not either of those things. This movie is a direct sequel to Bernard Rose's original 1992, what I believe to be a masterpiece. I have Candyman 1992 as one of my favorite 5 horror films ever. It's up there, and I don't have a list that most people would agree with. I have the Blair Witch Project in my top 5. Candyman is a more conventional horror movie. A classic, complex discovery plot horror movie where you have onset, there's a monster doing dastardly things. Discovery, somebody's dead, someone discovers it, there's a monster doing dastardly things. Confirmation, there's always going to be one character who says there is no monster, there might be dastardly things, but there's no monster. There's no such thing as monsters. But then at a certain point, that character, the dissenting voice that says this is a naturally occurring dastardly series of events, that character gets convinced. Hey, Carl Weathers as Al Dillon in Predator. Predator is also a classic horror movie. It follows those 4 components of the so-called complex discovery plot, the original Candyman. Daniel Robitaille / Candyman's committing murders. They discover it. There's a few characters that say this isn't correct, that there's no way that this is real, and the confrontation is you have to face off. In the case of the original Candyman, Helen Lyle, the magnificent future Oscar nominee Virginia Madsen, has to take down Candyman. Confrontation. In this movie, this film, the main character, mild spoiler, is the son of Anne Marie McCoy, the single mom that we meet in the first film, whose child is kidnapped. Either by Helen Lyle or by the Candyman, depending on how this movie hits you. Candyman 92, that is. So in this film, we meet this kid who was a toddler in 1992. He's all grown up now. And he's a successful artist, and that's the main character, Yahya Abdel-Mateen. So what this film establishes right away is the folklore, the mythology of Candyman, but not the way that I expected it to. They're talking about Helen Lyle. They're talking about the Virginia Madsen character, who was the central figure of the original, and the crazy shit that either did or didn't happen to her, and either she is or is not somebody who went bonkers and bump people off. So what the film here does so beautifully is the further in the story you get, the more the urban legend spoken of are actually not urban legends. They are what we remember from Candyman 92. The film gathers enormous momentum, and Mateen is up to the task as potentially a new Candyman or a different Candyman. This film teases the idea that Candyman may not present with literally the same face to everyone he sees, whereas in the first run of movies, I almost wish that part 2 and 3 hadn't taken place. But if Candyman killed, it's the same guy. It's Tony Todd's iteration. But this movie teases there's a whole hive. There could be a whole hive. And that's, if anything, even scarier. Now, I don't know what my expectation was for Candyman 2, but when I remember, and I was 21 when it came out, I'd already seen the original 4 or 5 times. I thought the original was one of the 5 best films of 1992, period. I would have put it ahead of, I love Big Al, but I would have put it ahead of Scent of a Woman. If you're asking me my 5 favorite films from 1992, I would have gone Unforgiven, The Crying Game, probably A Few Good Men, probably Howard's End. Slot Candyman in there. It's better than A League of Their Own or Lethal Weapon 3. You know what? You want to throw in like a crazy White Men Can't Jump or My Cousin Vinny, kind of a renegade pick? I love both of those movies. The original Candyman to me is not just a really good horror film. I think it's just a great movie overall. And it is a top 3 or 4 best adaptations I've ever seen. It's an adaptation of a short story by Clive Barker. If you don't know the name, he's basically the British Stephen King, shorthand. He is a horror film maestro, writes different kinds of stories than King, but it was a pedestrian short story called The Forbidden, which I have read. It is not interesting. It almost put me to sleep, even though I knew, this is where Bernard Rose got the idea for Candyman. I can't wait to read this story. Not very good. But Bernard Rose saw enough. It gave him ideas to go in different directions. The short story is set in Liverpool, not surprisingly. It's not set in Cabrini Green in a housing project from the early 90s in Chicago. It's an extraordinary adaptation. They took essentially a non-starter of a story and turned it into something amazing. The Candyman 2021 is not as good as the original. In my opinion, it is not even close. But something that I found interesting, and before I forget, it's streaming free on Amazon Prime. If you have access to Amazon, you can watch Candyman, the new one, right now. You can fire it up. But what I'm interested in, it was a box office hit. It grossed more than 3 times its production cost. Budget marketing was about $25 million, and it made $77. And it did very well when it hit streaming. People were spending $10, $20 either to rent or to purchase to stream so that they could watch whenever. There's nothing wrong with that. I've done that too. The film is at 84% on Rotten Tomatoes. That is a higher critical score than the original, which is 79, 80%, depending on which day that you log in. That's still a good number for what amounts to a slasher film, different kind of slasher film, but a slasher film nevertheless. Where it gets a little bit unusual, at least to me, the IMDb score, more or less like an audience score, for the original Candyman is way higher. It's almost a full point higher on a 10-point must system, the 1 to 10 scale. 1992 Candyman is 0.8 to 0.9 higher than the 2021 version. The 2021 version is less than 6. That is a very lousy score. I don't know what audiences were expecting, but whatever they were expecting, critics got it. Critics, by and large, said, wow, this is better than we expected. And a lot of audiences said, no, it didn't work, didn't like it. I can take issue with a lot of what happens in Candyman 2021. It is not as good as the original. I would say if the original is a 9, 9.5 out of 10, the sequel is a 7, 7.5. It gets a lot of things right, but there were a couple of corners that feel like they were cut when there was an opportunity to go deeper and do more than have a couple of well-orchestrated sequences where characters you know are going to die end up dying. But Mateen is so good as Anthony. He makes you believe in this character. And sometimes it is on a performer to elevate a story that's just okay. Like what I would say, put the movie on your back and run away with it. Now, it was always going to be his movie. He's the central character. But he really nails the role and gives us a kind of a window into the soul of somebody who didn't even remember their early trauma that he was exposed to. And maybe he was always going to end up the way that he ends up in this film. And the actress who played his mom in both movies, so she went by Vanessa Williams, and her full name is Vanessa Estelle Williams. The model and actress, the person we normally know as Vanessa Williams, she goes by Vanessa L. Williams. So the two women, it's their name. What are you going to do? Not everybody can pull like Michael Keaton changing his name because he was Michael Douglas, and people assumed, oh, he must be Diane Keaton's brother. No, he just changed his name because there was already a Michael Douglas in show business, and it's a good thing for Michael Keaton that he changed his name. But Vanessa Estelle Williams shows up late in this movie, and when I tell you that she practically steals the film just on the strength, not only of her performance, but the prior identification we have with her character. And she's so young in the original. And she is wearing the strain of 28 years of the trauma that she absorbed through the events of the original. Now, maybe Jordan Peele felt, this is something that is in the ether. We don't know if this is true or not. We're just speculating. But it's possible that Jordan Peele felt if he had just told the truth and said, I love what Nia, the filmmaker, DaCosta, I love what she did here. She basically made the sequel, if we're being honest, that this movie should have gotten in 1995. Now, it would have been different. It wouldn't have been this movie. But the sequel that I wanted to see, it would have been, mild spoiler to the original, it would have brought Virginia Madsen back in a very serious supporting role or possibly even a lead role. And once I read in the 95 version, when Entertainment Weekly talked about the movie, when I found out she wasn't coming back, I said, film's fucked. It's doomed. But by acknowledging the past, what they say, those who don't abide by the past are doomed to repeat it, or that kind of thing, that if you don't learn from the past, you're going to repeat it. Well, the characters in this film try to learn from the past, but sometimes you're just, in the immortal words of Clint Eastwood, shit out of luck. And this movie is not as gory as it could be, because the original is it has moments of very significant gore, and moments where if let's say you're afraid of bees, close your eyes. Tony Todd got paid extra to allow himself to be covered in bees, and they gave him $1,000 for every sting. 1,000 extra. That ain't enough. He should have got 10,000 extra for every sting. I can't even imagine how, you want to talk about an actor having a bad day? Tony Todd, that day in 1991 or early 92, when he got stung, I think 32 times. F to the U. Should have made an extra 320,000, not 32. But I digress. It is very difficult to do and make any horror film sequel worthwhile. You look at the Halloween series. The original Halloween, John Carpenter's with a very young 18-year-old Jamie Lee Curtis. Love Jamie Lee, who doesn't? There's arguments that have been made. People will say that there is not a single good Halloween film after the first one. I remember in 1998, and in the build-up to Halloween H2O, H20, Halloween 20, the 20-year anniversary, a lot of people were geeked up, and that movie has its defenders, but just as many people I know say, it sucks. Halloween 2 was lousy. Halloween Season of the Witch was not good. Halloween Revenge, Return of Michael Myers, Revenge of Michael Myers, they're just not good. Nightmare on Elm Street, some of the early sequels to Robert Englund from the 80s and 90s, some of them were better than others. Parts 3 and 4, almost as good as the original. Then it went off the rails. Wes Craven's New Nightmare, single biggest disappointment of my movie-going life up to that point. First 45 minutes, oh my God, this is amazing. And then the film just went off the cliff. So when I say that Nia DaCosta's Candyman, starring Yahya Abdel-Mateen, when I say it's not perfect, it's at least representative. It is a good horror movie. And from a certain point of view, if you haven't seen any Candyman movies, it might work even better. There'll be moments where you're confused. When Tony Todd appears, you'll be like, who the fuck is that guy? But it's a good movie. It is a worthy entry, the first worthy entry, the worthy follow-up to a truly great, iconic, legendary horror film. Because yeah, a hook-handed killer who speaks in a frightening rasp. Helen, I came for you. Just awesome. Tony Todd, the Shakespearean theater-trained actor who did so well in a ton of other movies. Tony Todd was in Platoon. He's got a pretty significant supporting role. It's the kind of thing that you might forget if you haven't seen Platoon in decades. Say, yeah, he's in Platoon. You know who else is in Platoon you probably forget? Johnny Depp. Plays the translator less than 2 years after being in Nightmare on Elm Street, the original, as Glenn, where he has a pretty big role there too. Tony Todd also makes a strong impression in Michael Bay's humongous box office hit The Rock, starring Nicolas Cage, and in just about his last big action role, the late great Sean Connery. But Candyman 2021, a really solid horror film, released on this day, August 27th, 2021. And if you are a fan of horror, if you've seen the original, you've got to see it. I may have reservations about it, but it is absolutely a worthy sequel to the original, and that is what it is. It is a direct, nearly 3 decades after the events of the first film, sequel to one of the best horror movies, I believe, ever. Go see it. It's on Amazon Prime, and you can rent it on Apple if you don't have Prime for a couple of bucks. You won't be disappointed. If you are a horror fan, it'll be like catnip. It'll be like manna from heaven, as they say. Candyman 2021, directed by Nia DaCosta, produced by Jordan Peele, and starring Yahya Abdel-Mateen, Tony Todd, Coleman Domingo, terrific in the film, Lakeith Stanfield, Vanessa Estelle Williams, and yeah, that's it. Those are the big names in the film. Go see it. This has been episode 284 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank you all for spending some of your Tuesday morning here with me in New York. If you checked out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify, Podbean, iTunes, Amazon Music, or the others, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then,